Marangeria, Nadu Yinjamara Kulanmain, Nadu Yinjamara Nurambangare. I also want to send my respects to the Yolngu people, the Yunupingu family, on the passing of their leader Yunupingu. We'll now pause for a moment to remember his life. Tonight, allegations of bigotry against trans people, neo-Nazi salutes and a Liberal Party MP suspended. How much did all of this play into the Liberals' historic Aston by-election defeat? On the panel, trans activist and podcast host Deni Todorovič, who is a passionate mental health advocate in the queer community. Victorian Liberal Party President Greg Mirabella will get his thoughts on that historic Liberal Party loss in Aston. Minister for Social Services and member for Kingston in South Australia, Amanda Rishworth. Culture News Editor for The Age and Sydney Morning Herald, Osman Faruqi. And Emmy Award-winning journalist and author Sara James, who has reported for NBC, CNN and PBS. And Donald Trump indicted. Will he use this for his presidential comeback? Thank you for that welcome. Now, you remember you can live stream us around the country on iView and all the socials. Quanda is the hashtag. Please get involved. Now, to get us started tonight, here's a question from Rosie O'Keefe.
With the recent election results in New South Wales, Aston, and with Labor in power throughout most of Australia at state and federal level, Liberal is dying out. Does the Liberal Party even have a future in Australia?
Nice easy one for you, Greg.
Oh, right off the bat. Of course it does. I had a look today, you know, we've actually been in this position before several times. In 1982-3, we were, you know, counted out. We came back in 2007. Yeah,
the Hawke government was in power for a very long time.
It was, but when we came back, you know, it was quite strong. And in 2007, when Kevin Rudd won, it was pretty much wall-to-wall Labor, but it didn't take long and it was wall-to-wall Liberals. So that's the first thing I'd point out. But the Liberal Party is alive and well. We've got a lot of work to do, though.
Where is it going wrong?
In my view, and I make no secret of this, I've said this quite often in recent years, the Liberal Party has stood still. We haven't actually evolved to really, we haven't adapted to the social media age. That's the first thing. So, you know, our values haven't changed, but the policies that we need for the future aren't there. And that's the primary task for us, is to develop those.
Deni, you were nodding along to that.
I was doing little quick snaps like this. I think that I'm very much of the belief system that whether you vote for Liberal, Labor, Greens, really I could care less as long as it's not Donald Trump. It's all about intention, and I think intention-led leadership is something that this country, skirt thing, jewellery, this country is really missing. So we had a little chat just then backstage, and this was the first time I ever voted Greens, and previously I'm from a Labor family, but my family were Jehovah's Witness for 10 years where they don't actually vote. So I got to make my first vote at 21 and I voted Labor. So my issue with the Liberal Party is that the definition of Liberal comes from liberation. And there's no liberation in a party that doesn't speak to the future generations of this country. So I think we need a little Liberal rebrand, honey. If you want to get the...
Yes, I agree.
Rosie, I might just come back to you. You'll be voting in a few years from now. As you start to make up your mind, what would you be looking for if the Liberals were to win your vote?
Definitely more climate action. I think the recent election has been motivated by the need for climate action for Australia, as it's crucial for all of our futures.
Greg.
Look, when I said that the Liberal Party has not adapted to the social media age, this is actually the classic point. Because in the social media world, the climate change debate was done and dusted years ago. and yet in our party we've had people that still want to argue about whether they're a believer or a denier. It doesn't matter, right? And in my view, and sort of letting you in on a bit of my thinking on this, the Liberal Party actually needs to hurdle it, because the solutions for the future don't lie in an ongoing debate about climate change. They lie in planning for our best environmental policy. That's where the solutions lie, because if we're going to have a sustainable power system going forward, and this connects to everything, it connects to environment, it connects to resources, it connects to agriculture, right? I believe the Liberal Party needs to position itself with policy that says we know the true environmental cost and we will have policy to address that, and that's where I think we need to go.
I want to go to Sara and Osman in just a moment, but I'll just ask you this, Greg. We're hearing about the issues. You're talking about standing still or not being able to keep up or not being able to speak to people like Rosie. What about issues like the voice to Parliament? Now, Federal Parliament is going to be meeting this week on this. There have been a lot of questions asked. Nationals have said no. The Liberals have still not put out a definitive position. Is that one of these litmus test issues that the Liberal Party is going to be judged on, depending which way it goes?
I think it possibly will be.
And so which way do you believe the Federal Party should lean?
Well, the first thing, I think the party room is meeting on Wednesday to determine whether it will be a conscience vote. If I were there, I think I'd be leaning toward a conscience vote. But I think it's important to remember too, that it was actually the Liberal Party that actually started this process. And there is plenty of support within the Liberal Party for the voice. But, Peter Dutton was around when we didn't know what the wording of Kevin Rudd's apology was going to be.
He also wasn't there for that apology,
that's right.
which
No,
he
that's exactly
subsequently
right.
apologised for.
That's exactly right. But his memory says to him, I want to know what Anthony Albanese is going to put in it. This is different. This is constitutional change. And we need to know what it is.
Is it also
that information is out there.
Yes,
I mean,
is.
there is a bill in the Parliament. There's an explanatory memorandum. The question has now been settled, and the text is there. And I think one of the problems, and I think what you're really saying is how important it is for the Liberal Party to engage in debate. Unfortunately, from a parliamentary level, and it goes much further than social media.
I agree.
There hasn't been a proper engagement. The Liberal Party's been reactionary to all the agenda that the government's had in the Parliament. And so that reactionary, just saying no, isn't sitting well with people. That's certainly the feedback I get.
I think... I'm sorry. Oh, yeah. I think that, with respect, referring to a generation as a social media generation is so incredibly condescending, when just because we've existed in a world with social media, it means that we're more informed, it means we're more engaged, but it doesn't make us a social media generation. I think we're an intention-led generation, and I think that the Liberal Party could do with more people of varying ages, diverse groups, gender identities in their party to better reflect, because my parents are boomers and the boomers are going to go soon, and then it's all up to Gen Z and millennials to run the world.
Can I just pick up on that?
Hopefully not too soon. I'm sitting here thinking he's counting me out. They're counting me out already.
But just to pick you up, correct. I did not say
it.
that. What I said, in a social media world.
Sure.
And that's a very different thing.
Can I go to Sara? I want to go to the next question in just a moment. But Sara, you're watching this, and there must be... this must be chiming with what you see in the United States, where we've seen increasing polarisation in politics and the Republicans turning to Donald Trump for a way back to office.
Yeah, and when you talk about reinvention, that's absolutely happening on the American stage. And the Republicans are a different party from the party of Ronald Reagan. They're a different party from the party of 15 years ago. I think what we need to understand is that parties are people. They're ideas and they're people. And as people are changing, as the issues that they care about are changing, then the parties are reflecting that. And this isn't exactly something that's brand new. If you go back in American history and you take a look, you're going to come up with some names of parties that you've never even heard of. The Free Soil Party. I mean, the Copperhead Democrats, they were the peace Democrats, and by peace, they didn't want the Civil War to be prosecuted to the end. they're gone. Those dinosaurs are out the door. There are parties that have disappeared, and they disappeared because they didn't have the right message for the times, and things altered. So that's what's happening. Sometimes it happens in ways that you appreciate and really like. Sometimes it's something you want to say goodbye to. But they're ongoing organisms that reflect the people.
Osman, one of the things that Rosie had raised, one of the issues Rosie had raised was the issue of climate. And all around the world we've seen this as being a definitive issue of the times. And there's been criticism of both sides of major politics in this, particularly from the Greens, hasn't there?
Yeah, I mean, I think climate, Deni made the point about the Liberal Party not having a message that it can use to connect with younger Australia. I think climate is a huge part of that. I think the really interesting thing, despite the fact that the Liberals were in power federally for a decade, in New South Wales for over a decade, the country shifted in a way that I don't think they've quite realised. The country's become younger, more diverse, more cosmopolitan, and more desperate for the need to take serious action on climate change. I think the Liberal Party, the coalition, have basically dealt themselves out of that by playing a completely non-existent role for the last decade. And that's now, I guess, given Labor the opportunity to do something. You know, I've got my own views on how effective they're going. I think today the numbers came out that showed that Australia is going to be exporting 70% more coal by 2028 than when Kevin Rudd signed the Kyoto Protocol in 2008. It's a pretty damning stat, and I think that goes to the fact that it's not just the coalition that is potentially out of step with where Australians are on climate, but I think all political parties have a lot more to do there.
I'd like to bring in someone now who voted in the Aston by-election, Hayden McQueenie. Hayden?
Hi Stan, hi panel. I've lived in Aston my whole life, and it's been in the Liberal Party's hands for just about as long. I've never felt represented in Parliament. Imagine my shock and dismay when I discovered that the best candidate that the Liberal Party could come up with was Rashina Campbell, a barrister parachuted in from the affluent suburb of Brunswick. The now MP Mary Doyle also doesn't live in Aston, but is at least Aston adjacent. Given the resounding defeat the Liberal Party sustained in the by-election, will they now learn not to take my electorate for granted?
Greg.
We had a number of nominations for that seat, one of whom lived in the seat. That person didn't actually turn up. So we had 3 candidates to consider, none of whom lived in the seat. So I'll just make that point first of all. Yes, Rashina lives in Brunswick, but she is an outstanding individual, and that's why she was pre-selected, I have to say. And it was a vote. There's a bit of media going around saying she was parachuted. She wasn't parachuted. There was actually a vote of the committee, and she was clearly the outstanding candidate. And, she did an amazing job, and everyone in that electorate that I spoke to that had met her had nothing but praise for the quality of the candidate. But you raised I think there's an issue. The question is, should MPs live in their electorate? Well, in the Liberal Party, we actually require our candidates to live in the electorate. And the minute she was nominated, she rented a house. Mary Doyle didn't. And I don't know what the percentage is, there's a significant number of Labor MPs, state and federal, that don't live in their electorates. But in the Liberal Party, we actually require it.
Mary Doyle is also not in the electorate, adjacent, yes, but not in the electorate, Amanda. Why not find someone in the electorate?
I think the key is making sure that people that seek to represent their communities understand the issues in their community. And I think at the last election...
I don't think... Hayden is actually making the point he'd like people to live in the electorate.
But I think I think if what you want out of a representative is someone that understands the issues that the community is facing, then Mary Doyle certainly understood and grew up for a long time in that area. But I think more generally the last election showed that political parties that don't pick candidates that reflect their election and electorate, and are connected to their electorates will not do well.
You learnt that lesson with Christina Keneally, didn't you, in Western Sydney? You parachuted her in, pushed aside a local person to put in a big name, big brand candidate, Didn't that show contempt for the electorate?
I think across the board, the last general election showed that you cannot take the electorate for granted. There's no safe seat anymore. I live in my electorate. I am very connected to my electorate, as a lot of MPs are, and I think that MPs that don't have that connection won't do as well. I think that particularly as a result of COVID, where people look to community for support, they looked to their local area. MPs have to stay connected to their local area, and that's critically important. And if they don't, they will be punished at the ballot box.
I think there's another part to it as well, Stan. I think geography and where the candidate lives, I think it's kind of crazy that it's a debate. Like, should the person who represents an electorate live there? To me, that's a bit of a no-brainer. But I think one of the things the Aston by-election showed, and I think the last federal election did as well, is people are looking for candidates and political parties to pick candidates that reflect the wider diversity of those communities. Aston is a seat that has 14% population from Chinese ancestry. That is 3 times the national average. The Liberal Party has a real problem speaking to voters from multicultural and more diverse backgrounds. They are going to experience this problem at the next election if they don't.
But wouldn't Rashina have spoken precisely to that and yet didn't get
No, I mean,
elected?
I think Rashina perhaps spoke to some people being from a more diverse background, but Aston in particular is a very highly Chinese background electorate. And I think that has the issue the Liberals have there is partly to do with their overall lack of diversity in Parliament, but also the policy positions that they've taken. I think someone like Peter Dutton is seen as being more intimidating to people, particularly of Chinese backgrounds, but all sorts of people from non-Anglo-speaking backgrounds as well.
Greg, what about your position? Because there have been questions raised about you and whether you should keep your job as part of the machinery that makes a lot of these decisions. And we've now seen a state election defeat and now the Aston by-election defeat.
I'm in the Liberal Party, Stan. Calls for resignation are everyday occurrences, firstly. But thanks for the question, because I took the job on in September. I did so at the behest of a lot of people who understand these problems actually very well and believe that I'm the person to do something about it. Unfortunately, I came in right on top of a state election, hadn't expected a by-election. But I'd make the point, as party president, I represent the rank and file members. I am the volunteer-in-chief. And so I'm not actually answerable to MPs, I'm answerable to the members. And so if I think I've lost the members' support, well, I'd walk out the door in a heartbeat because there's no point being there.
But if you've lost the voters' support, isn't that more important than the members' support?
Oh, well, that's a different thing. I mean, if you're talking about the reasons for the Aston by-election loss...
And the state election loss?
The state election, you know, I have to say, you know, the state election campaign was well underway by the time I came in, and state presidents don't run campaigns, state directors do. So I run the organisational wing. So the Aston by-election was actually run by our federal director, because we're between state directors at the moment. So my involvement...
This is past the parcel, so who goes in the end?
Finger pointing, that's right. So where's the blame? And
what about John Pizzuto?
Yeah, look, a different question. The finger pointing starts immediately. The defeat has a, you know, is an orphan. There's a number of factors that I think we'll do some research and try and nail this down. I'd point out, unfortunately, the last federal election, May last year, we dropped 8%, I think, and another 6% last weekend. That's 14% in 12 months. That is devastating. Now, the factors there, it's a combination, in my view. Our brand, you know, people aren't buying what we're selling, and they haven't been for some time, and we've got to fix that. The Labor Party played a very personal campaign against Peter Dutton. The booths were covered in the most unflattering photo of Peter Dutton they could find. That's playing the man. And I have some sympathy for that because, like Peter, I have a good head for radio. The media that we had in the lead-up on the Nazi liberal thing, obviously,
which we are just about to get to. But you've just raised a couple of things before we want to move on. I did ask you about John Pizzuto, and you didn't give a ringing endorsement of his leadership. So does he have your support?
Does he have my support? Of course he does.
He does.
Yes, he does.
And you believe that is the leader to take you forward?
Yes.
And Peter Dutton, because you said Peter Dutton was targeted. But if Peter Dutton was targeted, it would be because Labor sees him as a target. Is he the leader to renew the Liberal Party federally?
Well, you're talking about two things, capability versus, you know, electability in a retail sense. Peter Peter's, he's a surprisingly lovely bloke, and I hope he...
Why are you surprised?
He's got a great head for radio.
I don't know if that's a ringing endorsement. We will move on. This is our topic of our online poll tonight. We're asking you, should political candidates have to live in the suburbs they're fighting to represent? That goes to Hayden's question. So cast your votes on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. We're going to bring you the results of that a little bit later. Let's keep this discussion going now with a question from Raquel Stewart.
Hi, my question is also to Greg. So do you think that the recent media coverage of Moira Deeming's ultra-conservative views had any bearing on the loss of the seat of Aston over the weekend?
Could I just go to Deni first on that, and then I'll come straight back to you, Greg?
Thank you.
Thank you, Raquel.
Wow. I mean, my name is Deni and my pronouns are they, them, and thank you to the Q&A team for actually putting that in my supers. I believe it's the first time you've done that. And the reason why something as perhaps superfluous as a pronoun is important is because I just moved to Brunswick from Barwon Heads. I've been a Geelong boy, born and bred my whole life, and I'm so proud of Geelong. But it's a really bloody difficult place to live when you're a trans person. So today, I've been on the phone to my beautiful business partner who's in the audience, and I got attacked, I think, 6 times verbally in Brunswick, which is like super queer. And it was like, you know, someone ran down the window and said like the F slur that doesn't end in K. And I was like, okay, I have that on a necklace. Do something better. So by the end of that interaction, I was asked by a man, because I was wearing a Trans Lives Matter t-shirt, what's between your legs? Both? And I was like really taken aback. And then his girlfriend started filming me. And this is one microaggression that's actually not very micro at all. And then you compartmentalise, who am I? Why am I here? I don't feel safe. What happened at the steps of Parliament with Posey Parker, hi girl if you're watching, was like something out of The Handmaid's Tale. And trans people aged 14 to 25 are 15 times more likely to take their lives than cis youth. So with all due respect, if someone from the government, from the Liberal Party, is going to come and stand next to Posey, I don't care what Moira's excuse was, whether you knew the neo-Nazis were going to be there or not, you shouldn't be there. Because by default... And frankly, by being there, you are by proxy approving an anti-trans rhetoric, of which is literally Posey's MO. If you go on her website, it says this is the year of the TERF. So it's giving Make America Great Again. But like, let's kill trans kids, which is actually not funny at all. So Moira should have been expelled, and I think that, yeah, I think she got off way too easily.
Great.
I have no doubt that if Moira had her time over, she wouldn't have been there.
But she was, so I disagree.
Look, Moira, I don't know terribly well, but I know enough to know that Moira's first policy priority is actually pro-women. She's a
But trans women are women. So
okay, well, I'm not going to engage in that debate, but I'm just saying for Moira, she fights for women's rights, she fights for children's rights. And when you know a bit about Moira's background, you'd understand why. But her, I don't think she should have been there. If she'd asked my advice, I would have said don't. But her biggest mistake, I think, on the day was when because she told me when she saw the police cordon let the neo-Nazis through, she should have disengaged at that point.
She shouldn't have been there, and I'm sorry, and I'm not trying to be rude. If I can give you some context to what the last 6 months of my community's life has been, of which, by the way, is an intergenerational trauma that started in Stonewall in the 70s in Chelsea by a black trans woman named Marsha P. Johnson. That is how long we've been fighting to prove that we are human. And to have the audacity to even show up, stay in bed and watch Rage Doll. Like, seriously, stay at home. Because by you showing up, and I'm not angry at you, I'm angry at the system, and also by you defending her, if she believes in children's rights and women's rights, well then trans women are women, and children are 15 times more likely to kill themselves. Doll, you should have been there hurling abuse at Posey rather than letting the police roll on by and pepper spray trans kids.
There's a There's been a lot of Greg in the early part of the show, and I do thank you, Greg, for coming in, because a lot of these questions coming out of
100%.
Aston. So thank you very much for coming in. But I want to go to Sara in just a moment. But Greg, it does raise the question about obviously the offence Deni takes, but also the right of people to protest or the right of people to attend protests. How does that operate in a political system where a politician may end up at a protest where people do neo-Nazi salutes or have neo-Nazi views?
I'm not sure of the actual question here, Stan. I mean, if you're asking me my personal opinion on it.
Should politicians attend any protests? Where do you draw the line?
Well, as a general rule, it's a political wisdom no. Because, and I've seen this, where some politicians are at an event and you get a bunch of people moving behind them with banners and you get ambushed. Whatever you might think of Moira's opinions, she got ambushed and it didn't play well, you know, and you can say, yes, you shouldn't have been there, fine. But no, I don't think politicians, as a general rule, should do demos. They're in Parliament, for goodness sake.
But with all due respect, that's why young people aren't going to vote for the Liberal Party.
And I think, I mean, I have to say that when it comes to this protest, there's been a lot made out of whether or not people knew the Nazis were coming. But what was being pushed on the steps of Parliament House was really about division. It was about hate. It was about not inclusion. And I think for politicians, particularly politicians professing to come from mainstream parties, wanting to be the party of government, you can't be just dividing people and I guess existing on hatred. And my first thought was not whether the neo-Nazis there or not, I was thinking about the young person that may have been struggling with their gender identity, who saw this sort of hatred coming out and this argument that was very esoterical and not really including them. And I felt really sad for that.
There is, yes, sir.
I think what's happening is so much of this conversation is playing out in the United States as well. According to the American Civil Liberties Union, in 2023, this year, there have been 400 pieces of legislation in state legislatures across the country that in one form or another are restricting rights for the LGBTQ community. And that is a big jump from 2019 when, according to the ACLU, it was 60. And to just put a little bit of information around what that is, that's things like some of these laws are doing things like restricting an ability to use and choose the pronouns that you want. Questions about whether or not people will be able to get medical treatment, sport, whether or not you'll be able to participate in sport, and many other things. Bathrooms are another one, and even drag shows. So all of this, there's a story from Roll Call, which is the newspaper of Congress, basically, of Capitol Hill, and they pointed out that this originally in the political landscape was one where Republicans felt that it worked for them. In essence, parents care about their kids, they want to make sure their kids are getting all the information, but that pendulum can swing and it can be seen as too harsh and what's going on. So this is very much, this conversation is playing out right now in a big way in the United States.
And also, if I may interject, Greg, love you, doll. And I'm sorry, I get very passionate. I actually think you're a little bit hot, so here we go. Let me give you an example. Just say you're down at the pub with the boys, you watch the footy and you really need a wee, you've had a few beers and you're going to the bathroom and you look like that. You can go to the urinal or the cubicle and wee and get back in time for the next quarter or whatever football is. So then for me, if I'm at the Super Bowl, aka Rihanna's concert, and I need to wee, and I'm in 10-inch Manolo Blahnik shoes, thank you, and I'm like, okay, where am I going? To the boys' toilets? Well, I have a willy, so that's where I biologically should go, but if I go there, I'm going to get abused at the urinal. If I go to the cubicle, the security guard's going to think I'm, doing things I shouldn't do in there. So then I'm like, okay, I'll go to the girls' toilets. But if I go to the girls' toilets, what if there's a little girl in there? What if her mum thinks I'm a pedo? Because that's what the neo-Nazis said, right? Then there's no gender-diverse toilets, and all I need to do is empty my bladder to get back in time for diamonds.
Is there a question?
But I'm just giving you some context, right?
Yes.
But if you're with me, then I would assume that you would not think that it's okay? Like, why are we pulling out a violin string for Moira when she is part of the privilege?
Can I ask Osman? Osman, we've seen this play out in sport too. Greg made the point that Moira Deeming is there to support women's rights, and we've heard Deni also saying that trans women are women. But we know in sport that there are different rules being applied now. What about those who want to protest in support of what they believe are women? So people, where are the rights of people to express their points of view, given that freedom of speech, freedom of expression is part of our society?
There may be people, Stan, who have very genuinely held views on the specific categories and debates that are playing out at the IOC level, at all sorts of sporting levels, about what is a fair way to conduct sport at this stage. Those people, I think, exist, and I think they're participating in good faith. I'm not convinced that the Liberal figures that we've been talking about have much to do with those figures. I think if every person who said that they actually were protesting in order to stop trans people from accessing the bathrooms they want to access, cared about women's sport, I think women's sport would be in a much better state.
Amen.
You never actually hear them say anything about women's sport except when it's used as a fig leaf defence for criticisms of the way that they engage. I think this whole debate is so interesting because what Sara was explaining about the US, I think you know, they have been engaging in this for a number of years at a higher political level than we have, in the sense that it's been dominating so many high-level political conversations. The problem for Greg and the Liberals is that the base of the Liberal Party are full of so many weird freaks. They spend their time watching Fox News and Sky News After Dark, and they don't understand that normal Australians don't agree with them on this. They care about the things we've been talking about. They care about climate, housing affordability. They care about what young people are going to be dealing with for the next few decades. And instead they've imported this reactionary culture war that a fraction of normal people really care about.
We know that, you know, there are weird people across the political spectrum, Osman, and we know that we know that culture war is played on all sides of politics too, aren't they?
Yeah, look, I guess so, but I think when we're talking specifically about this issue, I don't see bad faith from what you want to call the left or the progressive side of this. I mean, Deni's made an extraordinary contribution sharing their personal stories. I think that's what one side is, right? One side is people trying to live the lives that they want to live, and another side is people trying to stop them from doing that. And I think that's deeply unfair.
And just on this as well, if this discussion has raised any difficulties for you or anyone you know, here are the numbers on the screen. Lifeline, of course, Q Life and Kids Helpline, and those numbers there if you need to access those numbers. We're going to move on now. We'll hear from Dennis Fitzgerald.
How can the words Trump, porn star and electoral bump be mentioned in one sentence without the words dignity, credibility and maybe even April Fool's Day?
What a question, Sara.
I wonder who this question is coming to. Maybe the person with the American accent. You know, as we know, what's happening right now, or actually on Tuesday, U.S. time at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, is that the sealed indictment will be unsealed, and we will know what the charges are that Donald Trump, former President Trump, is facing in New York. And until we know that, we're left to surmise and speculate, which is something I try not to do. But the reality is what we know in general is that these charges that are in the sealed indictment will have something to do with the payment to Stormy Daniels, the porn star, the adult actress, film actress, who was paid actually by Michael Cohen, who is the former president's fixer.
And just to be clear here, this is not just about the payment of so-called hush money, but it's the electoral implications of this, isn't it?
We think exactly.
We will wait to see what's revealed.
Exactly, but that is the supposition that it links to how that money was paid back. So money went back to the fixer, and then that got recorded as a transaction, a legal transaction, which in fact it doesn't look like it was. So what is that? Is that a violation of election law? So we don't know yet if that is going to be the line of argument, but that's the basic area of play. It's important to put this in a little bit of context. This is one of 4 different investigations that are going on into the former president. One's in Georgia. There are a couple DOJ, Department of Justice. Those are federal investigations that are going into the former president. He is fighting them. He says he is not guilty of any of this. He says it's a witch hunt. Now, it's worth noting that they're, surprise, surprise, polarizing in the United States. 90% of Democrats say these investigations are the right thing. And depending on the poll you look at, 80 to 93% of Republicans say it's a witch hunt.
Can I go to Osman on this? Does this become Trump's election campaign?
I mean, this is the risk, isn't it? Because it's like, even if we don't know what these charges are, so we're sort of hypothesising on a hypothetical.
It doesn't matter in a sense to Donald Trump, does it?
I mean, even if, you know, they end up being proven in court, does that matter to an enormous base of Trump supporters? Perhaps not.
The answer is not now.
Yeah, they're fundraising off them quite successfully already, and then you end up with a potentially bizarre and quite terrifying situation where a group of people who've slowly been radicalised over the last 4 to 5 years think that their guy is being locked up in an unfair, rigged system. And what do they do then? I don't think they just sit there
What does it
quietly.
mean, Osman, as someone who observes politics here and there, and I might go to you, Sara, just on this quickly before we move on, but what does it mean for American politics? Because Donald Trump didn't come out of nowhere. People who felt abandoned, people who felt left behind, the people who'd seen their factories closed down, who sent their children off to fight the wars of Iraq and Afghanistan, who felt as if Washington wasn't listening to them or seeing them. What does this mean for American politics? And if not Trump, what about those disaffected 90 million voters?
It's a really good question. I mean, Sara will have a lot to say about it as well, but I think the focus on Trump in some ways can be a distraction. I think we've seen Governor Ron DeSantis from Florida, who's kind of Trump on steroids in some ways, occupy so much of that ground. And I think there's a risk for people on the left, on the progressive side in the States, to think that, well, if we use this mechanism to get rid of Trump, it's all fine. But you're spot on. There are social and economic factors that...
And they're real.
To that. And they're real.
Sara?
Well, that's exactly right. And the reality is that what Trump did was he pulled some people who used to be Democrats into what is now the Republican Party. I mean, we talked earlier about the fact that parties change, and that's exactly what happened. Some disaffected people absolutely joined in this, and he spoke to them for that reason. I think, though, that where we're going at this moment is very much a watch this space, because right now this is a big poll bump for him, having this indictment, and he said he's welcomed it. But having watched American politics for a long time, I think what you saw at the beginning was people coming to his aid, right? We're all Republicans, and so we support you. But give it a little time and watch him start to move sideways and say, okay, well, he's really kind of distracted, and we've already said that we support him, so now maybe you want to support us. I fully expect to see that happen. But rest assured, right now, he has the MAGA base rested on. They still like Trump.
If you're just joining us, you're watching Q&A. We are live with Deni Todorovič, Greg Mirabella, Amanda Rishworth, Osman Faruqi and Sara James. Next, I'd like to bring in Alex Ritchie.
Hi, Stan.
Hi, Alex.
My question is for Amanda, and I'd love to know if is the Albanese government committed to meaningful policy change that can actually address the level of wealth inequality faced by ordinary Australians?
Well, look, thank you for that question. And I think your question goes to really how important it is that we have a fair and equal society. And I think we have a big job ahead of us to make sure that the next generation feels that they can get ahead. Part of that is generational when it comes to action on climate change. That is a big issue, and we've taken action on that. But in terms of generational wealth, you've seen us take action where we think it's fair. We announced just recently around superannuation and increasing the concessional rate that people with a balance of more than $3 million have on their super. We think that is a responsible course of action. I think most people would assume if you've got more than $3 million in your super, you don't need as big a concession. So we're looking across the board at things that we can do to make our community fairer, our society fairer. It also comes down to wages. Wages policy in this country needs to ensure that people do get a fair day's pay for a fair day's work, and that's why our focus has been on the minimum wage as well. So right across the board, we are looking at these things, but it also comes down to some really significant investments, whether that's health, whether that's education. It's giving people a good start in life.
Does it also mean that you give tax cuts to the rich because you're still committed to the stage 3 tax cuts?
Well, that was an election commitment that we made. We made that election commitment. That is our policy at the moment.
It's a commitment to give rich people more money. If what you're listening to Alex's question, he's asking you what can you do, isn't that something you can do? Commitment or not?
Well, it was a commitment before the last election. Those tax cuts go right across the income spectrum, but I do acknowledge that the largest amount of tax cuts go to more wealthy people. But we're looking across the board at what we can do. And part of that you've seen that we have taken action when it comes to superannuation and about those very, very large balances.
You made that point. I want to go back to Alex. Alex, how are you finding things at the moment? You're a teacher at a government school. For instance, buying a house. Is that on your radar?
Yeah, not really. It's and it's been kind of, I suppose, a bit shocking for me because I'm relatively new to what I do, and it's been life-changing. I love it, but and there are people much worse off than me, and it's something I hadn't really thought about until I do what I do now. That it would be really hard for me and my partner, who also works in public mental health. I work more hours than most people I know, and we feel like we're serving our community, but it's hard to think about buying a house.
How is that fair? That someone who works in mental health, your partner's working in mental health, is that right? And Alex is a teacher in a government school and can't afford to buy a house. That's on your watch.
Well, it is absolutely.
And interest rates are going up on your watch.
Well, let's be clear about housing affordability, and it is tough. And I am disappointed that we have a situation in this country where people, that Australian dream is not something that people can aspire to. And yes, do we want to do something about affordable housing? Absolutely.
Which you've actually failed to do because you've failed at the moment.
Dan, come on.
But the Housing Future Fund,
yes,
which you've been in negotiations with, which is now being pushed back again because you can't get that over the line because the Greens, for instance, say that there are significant problems with it.
Well, deal with a couple of things. Firstly, we have already taken some action when it comes to the NIFIC, which is agreements between states and territories and the Commonwealth to provide concessional loans. We've opened that up to allow for affordable and social housing. We've also looked at the Housing Supply Council because supply is a problem here. But when it comes to the Housing Future Fund, I do call on the Greens and the Liberal Party to seriously allow us to get on with that job.
Greg.
I'm just going to segue here a little bit. I feel your pain as a teacher, as a graduate, because it's always struck me as strange that the Labor Party, which is effectively the political arm of the union movement, that you've got unions that fight for and achieve significant, pay situations for their members. And I have always struggled with the notion that teachers, nurses, some of the most important people in our community get paid significantly less than a labourer on a CFMEU building site.
Osman, you've said that, you've written, I think, that people feel betrayed by what's happening at the moment with the Reserve Bank. Now, I know the Reserve Bank is independent, but there are still things, isn't there, the government can do? And even just in jawboning the Reserve Bank, where is the betrayal here?
Well, I mean, to the government's credit, they've announced a review into the Reserve Bank, and I think a lot of Australians are looking forward to what that has to say and what will happen, because I think they're confused by a situation where they thought interest rates were going to stay.
Well, they were told
that by the governor, and they've gone up the fastest rate on record. But it was a little bit bemusing to hear Amanda say that she kind of bemoans that loss of the Australian dream. I mean, that's not an accident. No. There's been a political consensus from both parties that housing should be and has been transferred into an asset, not a necessity of public life. We have negative gearing and capital gains tax concessions that encourage and help property investors accumulate more property and lock the rest of us, I don't own a house, out of the market. That's a deliberate decision. And I fear that what has happened is so many people in marginal seats have benefited from it. No one's got the courage to tackle it, and it means the rest of us are just screwed.
Amanda, Bill Shorten in 2019 took that to the electorate and lost, and you ran a mile from it in the 2022 election. Are you going to bring back the sort of reforms that Osman's talking about, reforms on things like negative gearing?
Well, if we look at what the challenge is, and there's no silver bullet to the challenge of housing affordability, one of the key issues is supply and having enough supply in the market. We've got the affordability...
Yeah, but that's not what Osman was talking about.
Supply? I mean,
he's talking specifically about something targeting negative gearing, which you were going to do in 2019, lost the election, and then it disappeared.
Well, if you're looking at how we actually get more supply into the market, there's a number of ways you can look at attracting supply into the market. That's why we've got the Affordability and Supply Council to look at supply. Negative gearing is not on our radar at the moment, but if we look at the dwellings per 1,000 people, we've actually got one of the lower numbers of dwellings per 1,000 people in the OECD. Supply is a problem, and we've got to look at how we get more affordable supply, more social housing into the market and built.
We're going to go to our next question now from Jeremy Poxon. Jeremy?
Minister Rishworth, on March 6th, you said, quote, that the government is doing what they can to support Australians in need by lauding the regular indexation of welfare payments. As a Jobseeker recipient, indexing meant basically an extra $1.60 into my bank account. When will you get real with the millions of Australians struggling on income support? Will this government commit to a real increase to the rate in the upcoming budget?
Look, thank you for that question. And of course, we do know Australians are doing it tough, and particularly those on income support. And our government has said where we can, we want to provide more support to people that is responsible.
That was a very direct question, though, and the question was, will the government commit to a real increase in the rate in the upcoming budget? It's a very straightforward question.
Well, I'm not going to be able to, announce the budget here. I don't think I'd get a lot of support from the Treasurer to do that. What I'm saying...
Are you going to take that to them? No, you're going to say, look, what is it at the moment? $745 a fortnight with dependents. Shouldn't that be increased?
Well, we will be looking across the board at everything we can do to support people. As I've already said on numerous occasions, indexation is a part of supporting regular adjustments, but of course we will be looking at how we can better support people. In the budget, we've also said the energy relief on people's bills will be incorporated into the May budget, and that will have a focus on those on government payments, but we'll always be looking at what we can do more for people that's responsible. But I have to say, we do have to do that in a responsible way. We do have inflation that's running high at the moment. As inflation runs high, we need to manage that. And so our economic plan is how we...
What if you took the tax cut away from the rich and gave some of that to the people on Jobseeker?
What we're talking is the upcoming budget, and we're talking about the upcoming budget in May, and we'll have announcements to make that. I'm making the general point is we will be looking at how we best can support people.
Yes, you were on Jobseeker, is that right, Deni?
No, absolutely. Thank you. During COVID, it literally got me through life, and it was a massive privilege because I was, I say this word with a lot of love. If you know, I was just a wog boy living at home with my parents, right? So we don't pay rent. So basically, I was getting Jobseeker and I was able to have a little buffer, but that in and of itself is a privilege. So my question to you, Amanda, it's my best friend's name, is I would love to know who in your party, the Treasurer, etc. I love politics, but I'm slightly more into American politics, so bear with me. So when they are making these decisions, is there someone in there with lived experience who has done it tough, or is it giving the slice of the cost of bread situation, because the fact of the matter is that I have a very privileged life. Manolios don't come cheap, but my girlfriends, you know, don't, full stop. Teachers, oh my God, all my best friends are teachers. Nurses, you know, they're schlepping around cafes to do this, that and the other to make ends meet. Like, as we say in Arabic, like, that's haram. Like, how can we come together to make, like, mazel tov instead of haram? Like, what's the plan?
I don't know if I can answer quite that question, but, you know, what we've said is that there are people with lots of lived experience, which is what you're talking about. They come from different backgrounds. Right. Obviously, being a member of Parliament, you're remunerated for that. But what we've got to do is balance a lot of priorities. There are significant priorities that we've got to do. And as the Treasurer said, we don't want to add to the inflation problem because that erodes people's quality of life. But we do want to see where we can help. And when we can help, where there's space to do it, we shall do so.
So what's the priority over the cost of living for Australians, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, it's the cost of living, but there's so many different areas. There is the income payment, there's health, there's education, there's a range of different priorities that we need to address.
Let's go back to Jeremy. Jeremy's got his hand up.
Minister, you've talked about balancing priorities and responsible economic management. So I'd put it to you directly. Do you think it's responsible economic management to starve welfare recipients? Do you think it's responsible economic management to drive more of them into homelessness? Is it responsible economic management to cut their ability to spend and circulate money through their economy? Because to me, that sounds grossly irresponsible.
Yeah.
Suggested it's not tough to live on Jobseeker. I've never suggested that.
Well, it's almost $745 a fortnight with dependents is more than tough. It's almost
tough.
Impossible,
Absolutely.
Isn't it?
Cost of living is tough at the moment, and I understand that, and we as a government will look at what we can do to support people with cost of living. It is our priority.
Can I just go back to that? Because the original question, before we move on, because I don't think we've got an answer to the original question, which was, will the government commit to a real increase in the rate in the upcoming budget? You can't say that now, so your answer to that is no right now. Is that right?
Well, you will get to see the budget when it's released by the Treasurer.
So you're going to take that, though? You're going to say to the Treasurer, I think we should do something about this rate.
Well, we've set up actually an Economic Inclusion Committee that is giving advice to government about a whole range of income payments.
I just want to be clear, though. Is this going to be one of the priorities? If these are the people who are earning the least,
We've been very clear that income payments is certainly something we'll have a careful look at in the budget, including setting up the Economic Inclusion Committee that will provide advice to government.
OK. We're going to bring you the result of our online poll now. We asked you, should political candidates have to live in the suburbs they're fighting to represent? Let's look at how you voted on that. Wow. OK. 75% yes, no, 20% unsure. What do you think of that, Sara?
Yeah, I was just interested in that poll, very interested. You know, the same issue plays out, surprise, surprise, in the US, but sometimes it just depends on who the person is. So, for example, famously one from each party, Hillary Clinton moved to New York, where, you know, very long association with Arkansas, moved to New York and then ran for senator not long after, I think the following year, and won. And Mitt Romney, who had been governor of the state of Massachusetts, moved out to Utah and won there as a senator. So to a certain extent, I guess it matters whether or not you're successful, but definitely you have to live in the district.
And does this go, I mean, one of the things we've seen in recent times, Osman, is that it's a pox on both houses, isn't it? Because the primary vote of both major parties is dropping. We're down, you know, you're getting elected now federally with less than a third of the primary vote. Is this the sort of thing that people are fed up with? Is this the sort of thing they want to see moving on?
I think this conversation, a few of the conversations that we're having tonight, Stan, are examples of that. I think you've got something as fundamental as how do we help people on welfare live lives without having to starve? And at the same time, we're saying we're not sure if we can do that. We're giving tax cuts to the wealthiest, as you pointed out. And we did during the pandemic. We increased welfare payments. We lifted people out of poverty. And then we made a political decision to, you know, chuck them back there. And the fact that we can't, as a country, seemingly have a party that wants to attract the progressive vote, in this case Labor, commit to helping them seems quite, incomprehensible to me. But to go to your question, you're right. We spent a lot of the earlier part of this evening talking about the crisis the Liberal Party is in. The Labor Party, federally, Victoria, New South Wales, won all those elections fair and square, but they won them with the lowest primary vote they'd ever had to win an election before. And that speaks to a fundamental ebbing away of the vote from both major parties, to Teals, to Greens, Independents, even parties on the right as well. That seemingly hasn't led to a huge crisis yet, but if we keep going down that path, we will end up with more extremists in Parliament. We'll end up with a population, I think this is more important, that just feels even more disenchanted with the political system. I think this
is the United States, Sarah.
That is happening to a certain
and one of the
extent.
things at the heart of the US, to go back to the earlier question about fairness and the wealth divide, is the horrendous wealth gap in the United States.
Yes,
that fuels this sort of political division, doesn't it?
There has been an increase in the separation in terms of the wealthy and poor Americans. Certainly, I know that from the budget this year, in the State of the Union address, President Biden, one of the things that he called for was reinstating a child tax credit that had been there during the pandemic and was relied upon by a lot of families. So again, we see these consistent issues that go across both these two great democracies. And I think really you do have a sense of a lot of young people in the United States, with the difference that I'll point out in a sec, where they really do want to feel like they're invested in the political debate, that they're part of the conversation. And it really matters because in the United States, people don't have to vote. So you've got to reach them or you're not going to win the election.
I'll just get a quick comment from Greg. Looking at that result as someone in the machinery of politics, what do you take away from that poll?
Sorry, on this question or the
No. The poll in general about, you chose someone outside of the area. Is this something you're going to make a priority of now, choosing the right people in the right seats?
I don't think so. Look, Rashina, her parents are from India. She born in Sydney, grew up, I can't remember. We all move around. But I can tell you what the Liberal Party offered in Aston was a truly outstanding candidate who was prepared to sign on the dotted line a lease. She was prepared to represent that electorate. Alan Tudge, the last member, he was from outside the electorate. So I think you've made the point. It depends on whether you win. But I want to agree with you too on the issue of this fracturing of the major parties' vote. We could have a whole program on this because it's bringing other forces into play. It is increasing the likelihood of fringe dwellers. It's also bringing into play, from our point of view, something that's always been there, but I think it's becoming more of an issue, is preferential voting and how that's playing out, because it's killing us. The Labor Party always manages to collect a lot of those preferences. But what we're seeing now with the Teals in particular is the preferential voting system being gamed by the miners and Labor to make us lose.
I might just go quickly, Hayden. You want to we'll have to make it quick, but if you can make
that's
your point.
fine. I just wanted to make the point that it's all very well and good that Rashina Campbell was willing to rent a house in Aston, but she doesn't have the lived experiences of the issues that the people in Aston have been living through.
Nor does your MP right now, who doesn't live there either.
I respectfully disagree.
Well, that is true, and I agree with you there. I personally didn't vote for either party for that very reason, but I do believe that Aston adjacent is still better than someone who has a vastly different background and it knows a vastly different area.
Greg, you might be able to have a conversation after the show if you want to speak to Hayden, but we'll hold that for now because I do want to finish with our last question from Jacqueline Plunkett.
Hello. What are some key actions, practical actions, that individuals and communities can take to support gender diverse people, and what can we do to combat phobias, transphobias, and increase understanding of diverse gender identities?
Can I put that to Greg, because we did come in on this at the start, and then I'll come to Deni.
Absolutely. I'll try and give you a quick take. My take. Australia is a funny place, and we are fundamentally, even though we're changing, we're fundamentally a nation that likes fairness, and we have evolved, and we are still evolving on this when you think at how far we've come, on same-sex marriage and everything else. And I think the average Australian likes everyone to get a fair go. Whether we're there yet, it's a moving target.
So we've got 1 minute and 15 seconds. I'm going to try to do this so fast.
Watching the clock, Deni.
Thank you for your question. So first of all, we got to same-sex marriage vote through a plebiscite that was a waste of money. Secondly, it's not a place where everyone wants a fair go, because let me propose something to you. I've been mulling over this. So old mate Moira is suspended for 9 months. So I would personally like to donate my services to you just for 90 minutes to come to your party and explain to you why the gender diverse community of Australia needs your support, why it was so wrong that Moira was there, because frankly, she's just gone on paid maternity leave. And when she gets back, those rhetorics and those belief systems are still there. To answer your darling question in the red gorgeous blouse and the lippy, you look stunning. It's really simple. Allyship isn't easy. My best friend is a Liberal voter. I have no beef with anyone. Yeah, like Mazel. So it's all about questions. No question is a dumb question or a silly question. All we ask is to be respected. You know, as Sky News so kindly put it, I'm not an abomination to women. I'm simply asking for a seat at the table, which is why I'm so grateful to be at this table, because frankly, most of my community are being assaulted, murdered, raped, or erased by the sporting industry, by politics, or just by some random idiot who strolls out of a nightclub and yells at us. So that's all you've got to do. Ask questions, be open. We are all people. Literally, all lives matter.
Thank you, Deni. Thank you again for your question as well. That's all we have time for. Thanks again to our panel, Deni Todorovič, Greg Mirabella, Amanda Rishworth, Osman Faruqi and Sara Jones. Please thank them. Thank you for sharing your stories and questions. Next week on Easter Monday, I'll be with you live from Sydney. Joining me, British journalist and broadcaster Andrew Neil, Professor of Indigenous Studies Anne Patel-Gray, Anglican Archbishop of Sydney Kanishka Rafael, Labor Senator for WA Fatima Payman and co-founder of the Daily Oz, Sara Seidler. Now you can head to our website to register to be in the audience. Until then, have a good night. Thank you.